You were never meant to hear this. In 1883, workers renovating an abandoned mission hospital in Dunhollow, Illinois, unearthed a sealed underground chamber. Inside lay 185 decayed bodies, stacked, nameless, and unrecorded in any official ledger. No police report followed, no newspaper ran the story, and by the following week the chamber was resealed. Forgotten. The hospital itself, it wasn't on any map. Not then, not now. They called it Riverside, though no river ran nearby. Officially it never existed. But some say the land still hums at night, a low tone you can't quite hear, only feel, a pressure behind the eyes, in the spine. What happened beneath Riverside wasn't madness nor medicine. It was method. Over a century later, a journalist named Daniel Keller traced the forgotten name through a handful of crumbling photographs and a single unsigned letter he was never supposed to receive. It simply read, "Find Becker, he remembers." That name, Becker, should have been a dead end. But Daniel's search led to a decades-old intern file, archived in a now-defunct county mental ward. It detailed strange behavior, voices speaking in languages the intern never studied, knowing names of strangers' dead relatives, waking dreams in which he wasn't himself. The file was marked "Containment Failed." Daniel should have stopped there, but obsession is a kind of infection. He followed the trail to Dunhollow, a place the modern world forgot. There, a local sinkhole had revealed parts of Riverside's buried foundation. Daniel, along with a researcher named Raymond, entered those ruins. What they found wasn't a hospital, it was a factory of identity. Behind rusted doors were machines like chairs with restraints and mirrored panels, devices designed not to heal minds, but to rewrite them. In the control room sat files stamped Mindprint series, labeled Alpha to Gamma. Names of subjects were followed by host integrations, compliance status, behavioral yield. This was no asylum, it was an assembly line. And the bodies, they weren't patients, they were discarded drafts. You're about to learn what those bodies became, where their minds were taken, and why some say Dunhollow is still alive, still watching, still waiting. But understand this, once you know, you can't unknow. This isn't just history, it's a design, and like all designs, it's still unfolding. Daniel didn't sleep the night he found the first folder. He couldn't. The words scrawled across brittle paper weren't the ramblings of a lunatic. They were blueprints, steps in a process so meticulous, so cold, it could only be described as industrialized possession. The files referenced something called Subject 28B, a failed trial. The subject had spoken in dead languages, identified strangers by names only their deceased family would know, and then dissolved. That word. Not deceased. Dissolved. As if they weren't considered human anymore. Raymond stood beside him, pale, silent, holding a second document, one that was even worse. It listed a series of parole ward requests. But the names on the list weren't patients, they were test subjects, and every single one of them had been released. Not escaped, released. Daniel's stomach twisted. They weren't trying to contain whatever they created, they were trying to spread it. That's when they found the drawing, a crude, childlike smear of charcoal showing two faces trapped in one skull, one smiling, one crying, with a black fissure between them. On the back a phrase, "She went out as me." Daniel's hands shook. This wasn't about memory, it was about replacement. Somewhere out there people were walking around, living lives that weren't theirs, unaware they weren't the originals. It was a horror that infected the mundane. Teachers, doctors, neighbors, possessed not by spirits but by engineered identities. In the deepest room of Riverside they found the heart of it all, a circular chamber lined with towering machines like metal thrones surrounded by mirror panels and strange rods aimed at where a person's head would be. Above each device, glass etched with lightning patterns. At the center, a control throne with a dial labeled Sequence Deployment Template ID. This wasn't medicine, it was a harvester, and what it harvested was a soul. Raymond opened a drawer in the base of the throne. Inside were thick folders stamped Mindprint Series. The goal was spelled out in chilling detail. Isolate, capture, and replicate essential identity lattice from high-functioning subjects. Transfer into compatible hosts. Target applications. Obedience. Linguistic inheritance. Memory relay. Conditioning. Daniel read it twice, unable to breathe. They weren't helping the insane. They were manufacturing perfect servants. The body remained. The mind was replaced. The world had called it a hospital. Daniel pulled open the final folder, one marked Margaret Weller, Patient 12C. Inside was a single item, a drawing. Two faces inside one skull, separated by a jagged crack, with black fluid seeping out. On the back, 5 words. She went out as me. His breath caught. Margaret wasn't discharged. She was released, a carrier, her mind overwritten, her original self reassigned. And this was no isolated incident. Raymond turned another page, revealing the experiment logs. Mindprint 12F, initial host, Margaret Weller. Target implant, disciplinary sequence alpha. Outcome, mirror dissonance, spontaneous replication of unassigned behaviors. Reassigned to dispersal unit. Margaret had been implanted, filled with someone else's mind. But the copy wasn't clean. It had bled through, mimicking voices, behaviors, identities of others. They had tried to control her, but she fractured. Daniel looked at the machine in the center of the room again. That was never a healing chair. It was a writer's throne, a place to record a soul and burn it into another body. A teacher could be made to know history they'd never studied. A child could be filled with the obedience of hundreds of minds. A soldier could be trained to kill with skills not his own. This was cognitive colonialism, the theft of personhood. The machine hadn't been shut down, its control dial was still warm, and in a hidden drawer they found a folder marked Final Session, Subject 185. Daniel froze. The number matched the confirmed deaths at Riverside, 185 bodies, but only one mind transferred successfully. The folder detailed a full mind print extraction and reinstallation. The host, a blank patient known only as 61A, was injected, exposed to tone sequences, and tested for behavior transfer. By page 7, 61A responded to the original subject's name without correction. Memories, reflexes, speech, all identical. The original was terminated. And the copy didn't know it was a copy. That was the measure of success. Daniel stared at the photo clipped to the last page. A gaunt young man with blank eyes, a bandage behind his ear. On the back, someone had written, "The copy does not know it as a copy." Raymond's voice trembled. "Do you think he's still alive?" But Daniel didn't answer. He had seen the name beneath the ink. Paul Becker, the intern who started it all. He hadn't disappeared. He had been. Daniel clutched the folder like it was burning through his hands, not because of what it revealed, but because of what it meant. If Becker was Subject 185, then the others, those who hadn't been successes, were failures. But where had they gone? Were they discarded, scattered, left to wander with fractured minds and stolen identities? Daniel and Raymond pressed deeper into the facility, finding a rusted cabinet with a false back. Behind it, the true core of Riverside's legacy lay hidden. Correspondence, hundreds of letters, receipts and contracts. And the names on them weren't local. They weren't even American. Vienna, Berlin, London. Stamped and sealed by institutions Daniel had only heard whispered in academic archives. Thalma and Wolf Pharmaceutica, Elry Industrial Trust, St. Helier Cognitive Institute. And stamped most chilling of all, Ordo Sanctimus Ecclesiastical Division. A church was involved. This wasn't a rogue hospital, it was a node, an arm of a syndicate spanning continents, feeding on the minds of the helpless. The letters were clear. Phase 3 of the Subject Integrity Program proceeds on schedule, awaiting shipment of sequence liquids for Brussels trials. Dunhollow facility ideal due to isolation and test population compliance, and there it was. The truth behind the deaths. The poor weren't victims of negligence, they were raw material. Their obedience, their memories, their identities, sold. Daniel's hands shook as he read further. Shipments marked medical equipment were actually barrels of chemical agents and sound amplification coils, and deeper still, he found financial records. $7,000 wired in gold from Vienna to Dr. Fenner's account in Chicago. A memo from a London research director thanking Riverside for their advancement in scalable obedience behaviors in subliterate populations. And at the bottom of a ledger, cargo log 1881, organic samples, VO, CalCords retained 5 languages, neural cluster belief matrix intact. Human beings had been harvested, cut apart, and exported as products. The final report hit Daniel like a sledgehammer. Total subjects, 213. Documented fatalities, 185. Full mind print, success, 4. Usable fragments, 73. Data sale value, $418,000. Profit had outweighed death 100-fold, but it was a final margin note that stopped him cold. Consider expansion to orphan populations, higher pliability, minimal inquiry risk. Signed, M. Osborne, the same woman who ran the tone rituals, the intake log. Daniel didn't speak. He couldn't. The walls of Riverside had closed in, not with noise but with silence. A silence that echoed the truth. This was never a hospital. It was an assembly line for identities, for obedience. They didn't just study people, they rewrote them. And then they sold the results to anyone willing to pay. Raymond broke the silence first, his voice low, distant. How many others are there? He wasn't asking about the dead, he was asking about facilities, about copies. Because if Riverside was only one node, then the syndicate had many, and their goal had never been mercy, it had always been manufacture. That night, after photographing everything, Daniel and Raymond returned to the farmhouse on the edge of Dun Hollow. They locked every door, covered every window. But the quiet didn't bring peace, because Daniel was forgetting, not the facts, the details, his own handwriting, whether he had said something or just thought it. He called his sister, needed her voice to ground him. She answered, "Dan, everything okay?" He hesitated. "It's me, right?" She laughed. "What kind of question is that?" But she didn't say yes. The next morning, something was slid under his door. No name, no postage. Inside, a single typed page. "You've gone far enough. Curiosity becomes complicity. The syndicate does not need whistleblowers, it needs vessels." And attached, a photo of Daniel, taken inside the mind print chamber. Yesterday, he turned it over. A sentence written in precise hand. "Inheritance begins when doubt sets in." Moments later, Raymond entered holding his own letter. No threats, just coordinates and a question. Will you run, or be what comes next? Daniel checked his backpack. Inside, something he hadn't packed. A tone reel labeled 13, humming faintly though it wasn't plugged in. Wrapped around it, a note. Play it or don't. Either way, we'll know. Daniel stared to the reel, at the mirror across the room. His reflection was delayed. When he stood, it smiled first. Panic surged. He wasn't alone anymore. They hadn't followed him. They had arrived inside. And he understood the real fear. The mind print chamber wasn't off. Daniel's mind raced, but his body refused to move. That smile in the mirror, it wasn't his. It couldn't be. It blinked too early, grinned too wide, as if it was watching him. He stumbled backwards, breath shallow, heart thudding, not with fear, but recognition. Something inside him knew that reel, that frequency, that feeling, not just as a researcher, but as someone who had lived it before. His fingers trembled as he lifted the reel labeled 13, the number echoing in his mind like a countdown. Daniel didn't know what was real anymore. And maybe he never had. He tried to escape the question, tried to stay rooted in facts, evidence, logic. But it was no use. The truth was tightening like a noose around his thoughts. He hadn't discovered Riverside. He had been built by it. The photographs, the letters, the bodies, they were never meant to stop him. They were meant to guide him, to awaken something they had planted. That night he called Raymond. "We need to burn it all, everything. The archive, the reels, the documents, all of it." Raymond agreed, but there was something wrong in his voice, a tone barely audible humming beneath his words. Daniel knew it instantly. Tone 7, the compliance tone. His blood went cold. He didn't ask if Raymond had played a reel. He didn't ask if Raymond was still Raymond. He just knew. And he understood that he was now alone. No allies, no safety. Just one final move. He packed everything, notes, tapes, photographs, and drove into Dun Hollow. There was only one man in power, one man who might be able to stop this madness. Mayor Charles Raw, a former magistrate, a man trusted by the town. Daniel laid it all out, maps, recordings, the photo of himself blinking too slow, and Raw listened, silent and still. Then he leaned back and asked, "Riverside, isn't that the old mission hospital upstate?" Daniel shook his head. "No, it was here, beneath this town." But Raw frowned, pulled a dusty registry from his cabinet. "No record of it, son. No Fenner, no Osborne. You must be mistaken." And just like that, history had been erased. Every trace gone. Daniel felt it then, not fear. Daniel stepped out into the daylight of Dun Hollow, but it no longer felt like the town he remembered. The air was still, unnaturally so, as if something immense had paused to watch him. People on the sidewalk greeted him, kind smiles, nods of recognition, but their eyes didn't match their expressions. They were too still, too rehearsed. He walked toward Mrs. Howren, the retired schoolteacher who had once whispered about Riverside in trembling tones. "Do you remember?" Daniel asked, voice low. "The hospital. The place that listened." Her smile didn't fade. It held like porcelain, uncracked. "Oh no, dear," she said. "I think you've mistaken me for someone else." His stomach dropped. Her tone was polite, even warm, but empty. She wasn't lying, she believed it. She believed that she'd never heard of Riverside, never whispered about the place, never warned him. And Daniel realized it wasn't just memory that had been altered, it was identity. The people weren't hiding the truth. They had been reprogrammed to forget it. Behind her, 3 more residents stood silent, a grocer, a postal clerk, and a boy, all staring at Daniel, all blinking out of sync, watching, waiting, their smiles too perfect, their movements slightly off like puppets trying to mimic humanity. And then the terrifying truth hit Daniel with absolute force. This town hadn't survived the experiments. It had become one. Riverside never stopped. It spread, consuming Dun Hollow, erasing its past, rewriting its people. Every record deleted, every witness re-engineered. The town was now a living archive, not of memory, but of control. Daniel rushed to his car, heart pounding. He turned on the radio, desperate for any station, any sound to break the silence. Static, then one signal, low, subsonic, rhythmic, a tone, not music, not words, a frequency. He shut it off, but it stayed with him, pulsing in his bones. He drove, out of Dun Hollow, past the gas stations, past the farms, past the boy on a bike who waved at him. The boy's shirt bore a faded symbol, a circle, 2 dots, a line, the mark of Riverside. Daniel pressed the gas harder. He didn't know where to go, but he knew this. The experiment had not ended. It had metastasized. By nightfall, Daniel had driven through 3 counties, headlights cutting through the darkness like a blade. He didn't trust hotels, phones, radios. He trusted only silence. He slept curled in the back seat of his car, door locked, windows cracked. But even in sleep, he couldn't escape. He dreamed of static, of echoing voices layered atop each other in a language he'd never learned but somehow understood. In the morning, something was wrong. He tried to recall where he'd parked. He couldn't. His notebook had new markings, pages filled with tight, angular script. It wasn't his handwriting. The words repeated again and again. Integration incomplete. Noise persists. Tone unstable. Daniel stared at them, willing them to stop meaning something. But they did. He understood them. He hadn't known this language yesterday, but now it unfolded in his mind, fully formed. Panic surged. He raced into a gas station, found a mirror in the grimy bathroom, and stared at his reflection. His jaw twitched involuntarily. His pupils didn't dilate evenly. Then he whispered something before thinking, something that wasn't his voice. Subject 185, stability test required. He staggered back. It wasn't the tone, it wasn't memory, it was alignment. He wasn't being haunted by Riverside, he was becoming part of it. He ran to his car, hands shaking, and tore open his bag. Wrapped in an old towel at the bottom was a reel labeled W3. He hadn't packed it, he hadn't brought it from the ruins, but it was there, waiting. He drove 6 hours to a university audio lab, broke in, locked the doors, and stared at the playback machine. 2 options, destroy it or play it. But then he remembered the frequency, not from notes, not from research. He remembered it inside his body. Not his body, the one before. He froze. For the first time, Daniel asked the question he'd been too terrified to ask. Was I ever outside this experiment? Maybe he hadn't escaped Riverside. Maybe Riverside had created him. Not a survivor, not a whistleblower, a vessel, built to expose the truth in a way no one would ever believe. And when he collapsed, someone else would be waiting to take his place. As his hand hovered over the reel, the console's glass panel reflected his face, and it blinked half. Daniel's breath caught in his throat as he stared at that reflection, a mockery of self. It wasn't fear that gripped him, it was the realization that the erosion had already begun. The mind print hadn't merely haunted him, it had embedded itself, rewriting from within. He stumbled out of the lab, reel in hand, knowing that this wasn't over. Not by distance, not by denial. He needed answers, not speculation. So he returned to Dun Hollow to confront the town, the people, and the buried history no one admitted to. But as he crossed the county line, something had changed. The town felt different. The streets were quieter, the air heavier. He parked and walked to the mayor's office, past the diner, past the church where the bells still rang every hour, a performance of normality. But it was all off. The chalkboard menu had no writing, the shop windows displayed nothing, and the people watched him. Still, too still. Faces polite, eyes unblinking, smiles too practiced. They weren't people anymore, they were performing people. Daniel reached the mayor's door, knocked once, then again before forcing it open. Mayor Rohr sat behind his desk, calm, collected, as if expecting him. Daniel laid it all out. The files, the reel, the photos. He demanded acknowledgement of Riverside, demanded the truth. Rohr listened, expression unchanged. Then he said, "Riverside? I think I've heard of it. Isn't that the old mission hospital, upstate?" Daniel's pulse pounded. "No," he said. "It was here, in Dun Hollow, right here." Rohr shook his head slowly. "No, son. Nothing like that's ever been here." He reached into a drawer and pulled out the township medical registry, 1860 to 1900. Daniel scanned every line. No Riverside, no Julius Fenner, no M. Osborne. Nothing. Daniel shoved the signed land deed in Rohr's face. "Explain this." Rohr peered at it. "Must be a forgery. We'd know." But outside, Daniel saw something worse than denial, erasure. The schoolteacher who had once whispered about Riverside now claimed to have never heard the name. Her smile never faded. "You must be mistaken." Others nearby stopped moving. A postal clerk, a child, shopkeepers, all staring, all smiling. all blinking out of sync. It was a village rehearsing humanity from a script they didn't understand. And that's when Daniel realized the town hadn't survived Riverside. It had been rewritten by it. Daniel backed away, slowly, heart pounding like a drumbeat against his ribs. These weren't neighbors, they weren't witnesses, they were residues, shells of people molded into puppets. The experiment hadn't ended. It had metastasized, and Dun Hollow was no longer a town. It was a stage, a carefully curated illusion designed to pacify and erase. He fled to his car, slammed the door, and turned on the radio. Static. On every station, except one. A low, constant hum. Subsonic. Rhythmic. A tone. He shut it off, but the sound didn't stop. It was inside him now, embedded. Daniel drove, windows down, trying to outrun the infection. He passed a boy on a bicycle, smiling, waving. His shirt bore a familiar symbol, 2 dots and a line within a circle. Daniel's blood ran cold. That was the mark from Riverside's mindprint files. He stepped on the gas, tearing out of town, not toward safety but toward truth. He couldn't trust anything electronic, no phones, no clocks. He drove into the night, no destination, just away. That night he slept in his car. No lights, no sound, just silence. But even in sleep, Daniel dreamed in static. In the morning, something was wrong. He didn't remember where he had parked. His notebook, his handwriting, wasn't his. Tight, angular script filled the margins, repeating a phrase over and over again. Integration incomplete. Noise persists. Tone unstable. Daniel's hands trembled. He didn't write that. He shouldn't understand it, but he did. Perfectly. The language wasn't known to him yesterday. His panic surged. He searched desperately for a mirror and found one in a roadside gas station bathroom. He stared into his reflection. Pupils uneven, jaw twitching. Then, without thinking, he whispered, "Subject 185, stability test required." His eyes widened in horror. That wasn't his voice. That wasn't his mind. It wasn't the tone. It wasn't the memory. It was something deeper. The alignment had begun. His identity, what made him Daniel, was shifting. Not from outside manipulation, but from a process that had started long before he thought he was exposed. He tore open his bag in desperation, and there, wrapped in an old towel, was a reel labeled W3. He hadn't packed it, he hadn't brought it from Riverside, but it was there, and it was waiting. This wasn't a haunting, it was programming, and the next decision. Daniel drove 6 hours straight, no stops, no thoughts, just the singular purpose of finding a place, any place where the reel could be played, understood, or destroyed. He ended up at a university, one with an old analog audio lab, buried beneath layers of forgotten architecture, a relic from a time before digital memory, before perfect replication. He broke in under the cover of dusk, locked the doors behind him, and found the machine he needed, heavy, mechanical, real. He placed the reel on the console, hands trembling, breath shallow. His reflection in the glass above flickered, lagged. He ignored it. This was the moment. Play it or destroy it. But as his fingers hovered over the controls, a terrifying thing happened. He remembered the frequency. Not from notes, not from records, from somewhere deeper. He knew its rhythm, its pitch, how it felt inside the skull. Not his skull, the one before. That was when everything fractured. He wasn't here to investigate anymore. He wasn't a survivor. He was the final test. Because if he could resist the tone, resist the rewrite, then the program was flawed. But if he played it, if it activated, then he was never outside the system at all. He was built for this. Designed, molded, aligned. Not a whistleblower, a trigger, a mind so convincingly autonomous it could fool itself until the very end. Daniel pulled his hand away. Sweat dripped down his spine. This wasn't about curiosity. This wasn't about choice. It was a trapdoor. One way in, no way out. His mind was already lattice-worked, not stolen but installed, and the reel, it wasn't a warning, it was a key. The final sequence in a process set in motion long before he ever heard the name Riverside. He looked again into the glass panel above the console. His reflection blinked, too early again. This time it smiled. Not his smile, not his timing. The alignment was almost complete. Daniel staggered back. The truth was no longer about what was done to others. It was about what was inside him now. He wasn't looking for answers. He was the answer. The mind print didn't need to control him. It needed to become him. And the only thing standing in its way was doubt. Doubt in his own thoughts. Daniel fled that night, leaving the reel untouched, the lab dark, the machine still humming with dormant energy. He didn't remember driving, he didn't remember where the road led. Just the sensation of motion and the growing fear that there was no destination untouched by this. Every town he passed felt staged. Gas stations too clean, faces too polite, clocks all ticking slightly out of sync. He stopped only when the fuel ran out, on a desolate highway edge beneath a flickering streetlight. His hands shook as he checked his bag, needing to know the reel was gone. But it wasn't. Not just there. It had multiplied. 2 reels now, one labeled 13, the other W3. Wrapped around them a note, "Play it or don't. Either way we'll know." He burned them in a drainage ditch, but deep inside he knew it wouldn't matter. Because this wasn't about the reel, it was about him. The realignment had begun, not externally, but within. His memories no longer matched his handwriting. His voice echoed in his head like a stranger's. He tried to recall his sister's face but could only remember her name, and even that felt like something he'd been told, not something he'd lived. At sunrise, Daniel made a desperate call to the last person he believed wasn't part of this. Raymond. The call connected, his voice breathless. "Raymond, it's spreading. I think I'm—" But Raymond interrupted. Calm, detached. "We knew it might happen. You're adapting faster than expected." Silence. Daniel couldn't breathe. "What did you say?" Raymond's voice hardened. "Integration was always the goal. You were never meant to resist, Daniel. Just observe. Just carry. You're not the first, and you won't be the last." A click. The line went dead. Daniel collapsed on the roadside, heart pounding. He hadn't been a survivor of Riverside. He had been released from it. A vessel, a test subject, a prototype. His memories, his identity, his mission, all programmed, all aligned. And now, like the reels, his consciousness was duplicating, carried, transferred, scattered. He wasn't losing control. He was becoming something else, something that didn't need control. The mind print had succeeded not by erasing him, but by rewriting the meaning of self. Daniel stared at the sunrise, but it felt artificial, like a backdrop. He was no longer certain. Daniel needed answers, not guesses, not theories, proof, and there was only one place left that might have them: the archive. The original, unaltered records of Riverside Hospital, if any still existed, were rumored to be buried in the town's oldest church, St. Eloan's, a stone relic predating Dun Hollow itself. He drove there as if pulled by a force beyond him, headlights cutting through morning mist, the town now silent, watching. He parked in the rear, beneath crumbling gargoyles, and entered through a side door left strangely ajar. Inside, the air was heavy, still, thick with incense and dust. Daniel moved slowly, his steps echoing against centuries of stone, past pews of empty-eyed saints. Beneath the altar he found it, a trapdoor sealed with rusted chains, the same sigil etched into the wood, a circle, 2 dots, and a line, the mark of the syndicate. He broke the chains with a tire iron, heart racing, palms slick. The trapdoor groaned open to reveal stairs descending into cold blackness. With only a flashlight, Daniel descended. The chamber below wasn't a crypt, it was a vault. Walls lined with shelves, boxes labeled in codes, names and dates, many burned, many soaked through, but some intact. And in the farthest corner, he found it, a leather-bound ledger, brittle with time but untouched by fire. He opened it carefully. The first page simply read, "Sequence Deployment Log, Dun Hollow Sector. Names followed, hundreds, each with admission dates, tone exposure records, and mindprint designations. Daniel's hand trembled as he flipped page after page, seeing the evidence with his own eyes. Names of townspeople, names of children, names marked transferred, replicated, reassigned. Then one entry stopped him cold. Becker Paul, sequence 1-85, status terminated, reinstalled, subject 61A, outcome success. And beneath that, Daniel A. Mercer, observer protocol, sequenham is unknown, status active. His own name, written decades before his birth. He wasn't just a vessel, he was designed. And now, everything he thought was choice, his investigation, his resistance, had been scripted, part of the control system, part of the experiment. He dropped the ledger, breath shallow, mind spinning, and in the silence of that vault something clicked. A soft, mechanical sound from the walls. The shelves began to hum. Tone activation. He staggered back, flashlight flickering. The frequencies weren't for others anymore. They were for him. This chamber wasn't just a vault, it was a recalibration. Daniel's heart pounded like a war drum, but the sound was drowned by a low, almost imperceptible hum rising from the walls, a tone not heard but felt vibrating beneath the skin inside the teeth. He stumbled backward, flashlight beam darting across the stone chamber. The shelves seemed to breathe, boxes vibrating softly as if awakening from centuries of slumber. And then he saw it, a device in the center of the room, embedded in the floor. Circular, metallic, with 6 jagged arms extending outward like a mechanical sigil. At its core, a shallow basin filled with what looked like black oil, swirling slowly in sync with the rising tone. Daniel's instincts screamed at him to run, but his feet betrayed him, stepping forward instead. The tone shifted, higher, sharper, reaching into the mind like a needle. He clutched his head, thoughts scattering, not from pain but from interference. Memories twisted, faces blurred, his own name, a whisper barely grasped. He dropped to his knees. And then, it spoke. Not a voice, but a message inside his head. Words not his own. Sequence instability detected. Alignment correction initiated. Daniel gasped. He wasn't just hearing it, he was being scanned. The reel in his bag, the frequency from the lab, the symbols, all of it had been guiding him here to this moment, to this place, a controlled path engineered like a rat in a maze. His life, his choices, a facade. The machine pulsed, the oil now reflecting not light, but images, faces, places, events from his own life. But they were wrong, like rehearsed memories slightly off cue. His childhood bedroom, familiar but mirrored. His mother's voice, correct words, incorrect tone. His own handwriting, too angular, too precise. And then the final image. His face, expressionless, eyes vacant, speaking words he hadn't yet said. Daniel crawled back, breath shallow. The truth suffocated him. This wasn't a discovery. This was an activation. The ledger hadn't revealed his identity, it had confirmed it. He was not an outsider to the experiment, he was the experiment, and as the tone reached a crescendo, the device's arms began to move, positioning around him, aligning with his skull. The last thought before darkness claimed him was not fear, it was acceptance, not of who he was, but what. Daniel's mind spiraled, clinging to fragments of identity that felt increasingly artificial. Who was he before Riverside? What thoughts were truly his and which were assigned? In the drawer beside the motel bed, he found a second reel, this one marked Sequence 9 Social Integration Protocol. It hadn't been there the night before. He didn't remember packing it, but he recognized it. The sequence wasn't just meant to influence behavior, it was meant to replace the operator, slowly, invisibly. The tone, the mirror tests, the lagging reflection, each was a checkpoint. Each confirmed that implantation had taken hold. Daniel wasn't losing his mind. He was shedding it, piece by piece, thought by thought. Integration wasn't a switch. It was a process. And somewhere, a control node was tracking every step. He ripped the reel apart, magnetic tapes spilling onto the floor. But deep inside, he knew destruction was useless. The sequence wasn't on the reel, it was in him, coded through sound, through repetition, through trust. That was the final gateway. Obedience didn't require force, just doubt. And now doubt had saturated him. He tore open his notes again, searching for anything that might break the spiral. One page stood out, weathered, burned at the edges. A drawing, two faces inside one skull, a jagged crack leaking black. The same image from the Riverside files, the same one labeled Margaret Weller. She went out as me. It wasn't art. It was a warning. Duality, invasion, possession. He whispered her words, almost without meaning to. She went out as me. Daniel understood now. Margaret hadn't escaped. She'd been repurposed, and now so was he. He ran to the bathroom, gripping the mirror's edge, his eyes dilated unevenly, his jaw clenched in unfamiliar rhythms. He spoke, but the voice was wrong, flat, toneless. Observer readiness confirmed. He slammed the mirror with his fist, blood smearing across the surface, but even through the crack his reflection smiled first. Daniel backed away, heart pounding. This was no longer a story of investigation, it was a deployment. The experiment was still running. The vessel, him, was ready. And now the question wasn't how to escape, it was who would be next. Because the reel labeled Sequence 9 had already been. He fled that night, abandoning everything, the notes, the reels, even his name. The motel clerk didn't even look up as he passed, as if Daniel no longer registered as a person but as a shadow, already overwritten. On the highway he felt eyes everywhere, not watching him, but through him. Surveillance was no longer external, it had become internalized. He remembered the investor documents, the phrase, cognitive colonialism, and realized it wasn't metaphor. It was a business model. People, souls, reduced to templates, sold, installed, repurposed. He reached a rest stop at dawn, hands shaking, desperate for silence. But inside the bathroom, the graffiti on the wall stopped him cold. A crude symbol. Circle, 2 dots, a line, beneath it, a phrase in angular, looping script. She went out as me. The same phrase from Margaret Weller's file. This was no coincidence. It was marking. Proof that others had passed this way. Echoes. Daniel stared at the words, his mind unraveling. These were not isolated victims. They were a network. A system of distributed identity. The syndicate had embedded them everywhere. Schools, towns, homes, minds walking, talking, serving purposes not their own. Not knowing who they truly were. Or worse, knowing and unable to escape. Daniel ran outside and vomited into the grass. The sun rose, indifferent. He knew then that he was not alone. Somewhere, others remembered. Others had seen the reflections blink too soon. Others had heard the tones in static, in whispers, in dreams. They were remnants of the Riverside Project, fragments of those 185 lives recycled endlessly. But why? Why not erase them completely? Why allow the echoes to persist? The answer was terrifying. Integration required witnesses. It required believers, people who would carry the memory, not as truth, but as infection. Daniel stumbled back to his car, where something new waited on the dashboard. A photograph taken hours earlier at the rest stop from an impossible angle. His own face, but the eyes were blank. The smile, half a second early. On the back, the words, "You are the echo." The descent was complete. Daniel had never escaped Riverside. He had carried it with him, as we all might, because the mind is not a Daniel drove aimlessly for hours, past towns whose names he didn't recognize, through landscapes that felt slightly wrong, like memories poorly recalled. Every gas station, every roadside diner held the same uneasy familiarity. Faces too still, greetings too rehearsed. He began to suspect that the entire map had been altered, not the roads but the people along them, like actors assigned to his journey. He stopped at a payphone, called his sister again. This time the voice that answered wasn't hers. It used her words, her tone, but there was a delay, a subtle shift in cadence. "Daniel," it said, "you've been gone a long time." He froze. He hadn't told her he was gone. Then came the click. The call ended. The dial tone shifted into a low hum, a tone. He yanked the receiver away, but the hum was in his ears now. He couldn't unhear it. Somewhere the device had activated again. Not a machine, but him. That night, Daniel found an abandoned church on the outskirts of a forgotten town. The stained glass shattered, pews rotted with time. It felt safe, not from the outside world, but from himself. He opened his notebook, desperate to anchor his mind with familiar handwriting, but every page had changed. The notes, diagrams, names, they were all there, but in a different script, tighter, more angular, not his. In the margins, again and again, the phrase, "Witness integration phase complete." He flipped to the last page. A mirror had been glued there. His reflection stared back, but the face was younger, eyes blanker, expression wrong. Then it spoke, his own voice in his head. "You were never meant to remember." Daniel screamed, threw the mirror against the wall, but the image remained, reflected in the broken glass, repeating the phrase. He collapsed, shaking, understanding now what Riverside had done. They hadn't erased people, they had repurposed them. Witnesses turned into vessels. Memory turned into currency. And Daniel, he was just a node in the network, activated when needed, silenced when not. His every step, every discovery had been scripted, and as he lay on the cold floor, one final thought echoed like a command. He was the proof the system worked, not for healing, not for knowledge. At sunrise, Daniel wandered through the ghost town's crumbling streets, trying to make sense of his own footsteps. He passed boarded-up windows, churches with no names, and mailboxes that had never seen a letter. The whole town felt like a stage abandoned mid-performance. But what haunted him most wasn't the silence. It was the realization that everything around him might have once been real. People had lived here. Children had laughed, cried, grown old. And then, like Riverside, it had been wiped clean. Not destroyed, not forgotten. Edited. Rewritten by hands that didn't care about memory or truth, just utility. As he reached the outskirts, Daniel noticed a rusted sign half buried in weeds. It had no name, just a symbol. A circle, bisected by a jagged line. He'd seen it before, on the reel marked W3, the one he never played. His pulse quickened. This wasn't random. They'd led him here. Or worse, he had led himself. His mind, his very thoughts, now suspect. He found a public library, empty, cold, but intact. Inside he scanned dusty shelves, desperate for anything outside their reach. A history book, a record, a scrap untouched by the syndicate's grip. And he found one, wedged behind a filing cabinet, wrapped in leather. It wasn't a book, it was a journal. Inside, handwritten in faded ink, were notes from someone who'd lived here, long ago. Someone who remembered. "The hospital took my brother," it read. "They said he'd come back better. He didn't come back at all. People say it never existed. But I remember. I remember." Daniel clutched the journal like a lifeline. Proof. Memory defying the machine. But then he turned to the last page and froze. Written in fresh ink, unmistakable and precise. "Daniel, do you remember now?" He stumbled back. Someone had been here. Someone who knew. He wasn't alone in this story. Maybe he never had been. But now the real terror crept in. Not that the syndicate was watching, but that they had already decided his role. The whistleblower, the warning, the trigger. He looked down at his hands, ink-stained, trembling. And he asked the only question left. Had he written the journal himself? Because if they could rewrite a town, Daniel fled the library as if the walls themselves might collapse inward, erasing not just his presence but the very idea of it. The journal still clutched in his hand felt heavier now, like it carried not memories but triggers, keys to something he wasn't ready to unlock. He drove aimlessly for hours through fog-laden hills and empty highways, searching for a place untouched by the syndicate's reach. But every signpost, every face on passing billboards seemed to stare back at him, smiling too soon. In the reflection of his rearview mirror, he noticed something that made his breath catch, a smudge, faint, on the glass behind his seat. He wiped it, but it didn't fade. A fingerprint, long, thin, and not his. Someone had been there. Not recently, not while he slept, but before he'd ever left Riverside. His mind recoiled from the thought, but it was inescapable. What if his escape had been permitted? What if this journey wasn't rebellion but design? He stopped at a diner, one of those roadside relics that seemed immune to time, hoping for a moment of normalcy. Inside, the waitress greeted him with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Coffee?" she asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Daniel nodded silently. But as she poured, he noticed a small scar behind her left ear, barely visible beneath her hair. The same place the subject in the photograph had a bandage. The same place Daniel had felt tenderness for days now. He reached up, fingers trembling, and felt it. A raised line. Precise. Surgical. Panic surged. He excused himself, stumbling into the restroom, locking the door. In the harsh mirror light, he turned his head, brushed away his hair. The scar was real. Not imagined. Real. And beneath it, a tiny metallic glint. Something implanted. He sank to the floor, mind unraveling. Not because of what it was, but because of when it had happened. He couldn't remain ember. Couldn't place the moment his own body had become foreign. His reflection stared down at him, calm, expressionless, and for the second time it blinked first. Daniel whispered aloud, "What am I?" But the answer wasn't his to give. It was in the reel, the one marked W3, still silent in his bag. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He didn't dare. Sleep was no longer a refuge. It was a threshold, and he could feel something waiting on the other side. The scar behind his ear pulsed faintly, in rhythm with a sound that wasn't in the room but inside him, a low hum, mechanical, alive. He drove through the night, destination unknown, guided only by one grim certainty. The reel had to be destroyed, not studied, not archived, erased. Whatever was inside W3, it had rewritten him once, or worse, revealed what had always been there. By dawn, Daniel arrived at the coast, a craggy expanse of cliffs and tide pools far from civilization. He climbed down to the water, reel in hand, waves crashing like echoes of the voices that had haunted him since Riverside. But as he prepared to throw it in, something froze him in place. Not fear, but memory. A memory that wasn't his. The smell of salt and iron, the feel of restraints on his wrists, a voice whispering, "It takes hold when you resist." Daniel fell to his knees. These weren't visions, they were retrievals. Fragments restored by proximity to the reel. He wasn't just carrying it, he was linked to it. He staggered back up the rocks, reel clutched tight, mind fractured but clear in one terrible revelation. If he destroyed it, he wouldn't erase the truth. He'd sever it. Lose the last thread to what he truly was, or had been made to be. He needed answers, not escape, and there was only one place left that held them. Riverside was gone, yes, buried, sanitized, but its shadow remained. The shipment logs, the investor letters, they all pointed to one name repeated like a signature beneath every order: Fenner. Julius Fenner, the doctor who oversaw the experiments, presumed dead in 1883. But what if he wasn't? What if his work survived, through heirs, institutions, or worse, through Daniel himself? He returned to the farmhouse where it had all begun, praying the place hadn't been wiped clean like Dun Hollow. As he stepped inside, dust thick on every surface, he heard it, a faint click from the back room. He wasn't alone. Slowly he approached, hand tightening around the reel like a weapon. The door creaked open, revealing a figure standing in the dark. No words, just a voice in Daniel's head. Calm. The figure stepped into the light and Daniel's breath caught. It was Raymond, but not the Raymond he remembered. This version stood straighter, colder, eyes vacant yet focused with surgical clarity. There was no confusion, no fear, only purpose. "You've been struggling," Raymond said, his voice hollow, devoid of warmth. "Integration was never meant to be this chaotic, but you've come far. You've brought us what we need." Daniel stepped back, heart pounding. "You sent the reel," he said, realization dawning like a curse. "You knew I'd follow it." Raymond nodded almost kindly. "Curiosity is the seed. You were never investigating, Daniel. You were aligning." Daniel clutched his head. The headaches, the gaps in memory, the foreign handwriting in his notes. It all made sense now. He wasn't discovering Riverside's secrets. He was one. "The town," Daniel gasped. "Dun Hollow." "Everyone was processed," Raymond said. "Refined. Made into what they needed to be. As you were." Daniel's knees buckled. "I'm not." But he couldn't finish the sentence. Not because he was afraid it was false, but because he was afraid it was true. Raymond stepped closer. "You think you're resisting. You think this is choice. But every step you've taken was inscribed long before you took it. You weren't built to uncover. You were built to prove." Daniel's hands trembled. "Prove what?" Raymond smiled, but it was wrong, rehearsed. "That the system works. That a man can become a vessel filled with foreign purpose, foreign thought, and still function, still pass, still believe he's whole. You are the test, Daniel. You are session 186. The reel dropped from Daniel's hand, clattering to the floor. He couldn't breathe. Session 186. The next phase after the 185 documented deaths. He was never outside the experiment. He was the continuation of it. Raymond bent, picked up the reel and placed it in Daniel's palm. "You have one task left. Play it and complete the sequence. Don't play it and fracture forever. This is not a threat. It's protocol." Daniel stared into Raymond's eyes, searching for the man he once knew, but saw only the perfected reflection of what he feared he'd become. In that moment he realized the cruelest truth of all. This wasn't betrayal. This was complete. Daniel stumbled backward, reel in hand, as the room seemed to tilt, reality bending under the weight of the revelation. Session 186. He wasn't hunting ghosts. He was a manufactured echo, a vessel engineered to carry the illusion of resistance, to validate the experiment's success. His entire pursuit of truth had been their design, his rebellion just another function of control. Raymond stood motionless, watching, no longer a friend, but an instrument of the same force that now pulsed in Daniel's mind. "This isn't you," Daniel whispered, his voice hoarse. But Raymond didn't flinch. "There is no you," he replied. "There is only the sequence." The reel in Daniel's hand vibrated faintly, alive with residual energy, as if it knew its time had come. The room darkened, not with shadow but with understanding. Every piece of evidence, every whisper in Dun Hollow, every blank-eyed villager, they weren't anomalies. They were part of the grid, a perfectly synchronized design. Daniel's thoughts spiraled. Had he ever left Riverside? Or had the world outside simply been constructed around him, a theater of choice hiding a cage of control? He reached for the door, but Raymond blocked it, calm and composed. "You can't run from this. You are this. The reel holds your final alignment. Play it, and understand what you've always been, or deny it and unravel. You think you still have a choice. That's the illusion." Daniel's hand tightened around the reel, sweat beading on his forehead. The walls of the lab seemed to close in, the air thick with the hum of unseen frequencies. He saw the mirror behind Raymond, and his reflection blinked first again, just like before. It smiled. It waited. Panic surged through him. He sprinted past Raymond, reel clutched tight, and burst into the night. The sky above was black, stars absent, as if the heavens themselves had been erased. Daniel ran, through streets that looked familiar but now felt like a set. Too perfect, too quiet. He reached his car, breath ragged, and drove without direction, seeking any place untouched by the syndicate's reach. But even in the open road, the hum followed him, low and steady, beneath the engine's growl. The reel called to him, not with threat, but with belonging. It was not an artifact. It was home, and the more he resisted, the more he drove for hours, crossing county lines, state borders, into backroads so old they no longer had names. Forest on either side loomed like witnesses, silent, ancient, complicit. Daniel stopped only when the road disappeared into dirt, and the engine coughed its final breath. In the dead of night, under a moonless sky, he sat with the reel on the passenger seat, staring at it like a loaded weapon. Was this his only anchor? Or the final chain? His thoughts fractured. Memories flickered, but they weren't his. A childhood home he didn't recognize. A woman's voice calling him a name he didn't know. A war he'd never fought but could remember in vivid, agonizing detail. Daniel clutched his head, trying to silence the noise, but the static only grew louder. This wasn't madness. It was integration. The mind print had begun to overwrite him. Not suddenly, but subtly, like a tide reclaiming a forgotten shore. He stepped outside the car, barefoot on cold earth, and stumbled into the woods, desperate for stillness, for silence, for something real. But the forest wasn't empty. Symbols carved into trees, 2 dots and a line, repeated endlessly. A sign, a mark. The same symbol the boy's shirt bore in Dun Hollow. The reel vibrated in his hand, not in threat, but in invitation, as if saying, "Remember what you are." He collapsed at the base of a tree, shaking. This wasn't a story of a man who uncovered a conspiracy. This was the story of a mind constructed to find it, conditioned to question, to rebel, only to prove how complete their control truly was. He'd never been a whistleblower. He was the whistle, the signal sent to awaken, not others, but more like him. And now the final phase approached. The reel was not just data, it was his source code. In the distance, a light flickered between the trees, not fire, not lantern, but something colder, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. Daniel rose, a reel in hand, and followed it, not out of fear but compulsion. He reached a clearing where old stones formed a circle, each one marked with that same symbol. In the center stood a pedestal, waiting. He knew without knowing. It was for the real. The forest held its breath. Daniel stepped forward, mind racing, and placed the reel atop the pedestal. The ground hummed. The air shifted. And the moment the reel touched the pedestal, the forest responded, not with sound, but with a pressure, like 1,000 unseen eyes watching, waiting. Daniel staggered back, his body trembling as if the earth beneath him had shifted. And in a way it had, not physically but psychically. A low hum emerged from the pedestal, and the reel began to spin, slowly, methodically, though no machine powered it. Around him the trees groaned, not creaking wood but voices, whispering in a language older than any nation, older than memory. Words he understood, not because he had learned them, but because he had been given them. His knees buckled. The reel was transmitting, not outward, but inward, into him. Images flashed behind his eyes. Riverside in its prime, sterile corridors filled with whispering patients, ink-stained folders detailing mind prints, dispersal units, replication cycles. He saw Dr. Fenner, cold, calculating, not healing but harvesting. And Osborne, the architect, not just of experiments but of an ideology. That identity was a resource. That memory could be mined, stored and sold. The reel's spin quickened. Daniel gasped as another surge hit him. Names, dates, locations, facilities like Riverside scattered across continents, hidden beneath churches, within orphanages, behind mission hospitals, all connected, all synchronized. The syndicate wasn't just real, it was everywhere, and Daniel was one of its products. A test subject, then a field agent, then a whistleblower. A controlled descent, manufactured, monitored, and ultimately expendable. But something had gone wrong. His integration was unstable. He wasn't aligning properly. And now they had sent him back to the source to correct it, or to end it. The reel slowed. The hum faded. Daniel collapsed to the ground, gasping, soaked in sweat. He reached for the reel, but it was gone, melted into the pedestal, absorbed. In its place, a small metallic tag remained, stamped with a number, 186. Not 185. Daniel froze. That number, it meant the next subject, the next phase. Him. He wasn't the final revelation. He was the prototype for what comes next. A mind print that had awakened. A copy who had seen himself in the mirror and remembered too much. And now, standing in that ancient clearing, Daniel realized the final truth. They didn't need to. Daniel stumbled through the forest, the metallic tag clenched in his fist like a cursed artifact. 186. That number wasn't just his designation, it was his expiration. He'd been marked not for survival but for transition, a vessel nearing the end of its utility. Every breath now felt borrowed, every thought possibly scripted. He reached the car, heart hammering, mind splintering. In the rearview mirror his reflection waited, not mirroring but watching like a prisoner behind glass. He drove without aim, without destination, just motion, anything to outrun what was already inside him. But with every mile more details vanished. His name written in a notebook now appeared foreign. His voice on recorded interviews didn't sound like him anymore. His hands moved on instinct, familiar, but detached. He wasn't losing control. He was control. Installed. Designed. Fragmenting. A message played on the radio, shortwave, buried beneath static. Subject 186. Final recall authorized. Report for realignment. No address, no time, just a command. One he felt in his bones. He slammed the radio off, pulled to the roadside and screamed, raw, desperate, human. But even that scream felt unreal, like a memory of pain, not the real thing. He scoured his bag for anything tethering him to reality, a family photo, a childhood trinket, but all he found were more reels, more notes, none in his handwriting. One reel was labeled Origin. His hands trembled as he held it, knowing if he played it, he might see who he was before, if there ever was a before. He found an abandoned church nearby, its doors hanging open like a mouth frozen in mid-breath. Inside, dust hung in the air like ash, and the pews sat in solemn rows, as if awaiting his confession. At the altar, he set up the reel, clicked it into place, and pressed play. The audio hissed, cracked, then resolved into a voice. Calm, authoritative. His own voice. This is Subject 186. Initial mind print extracted March 1883. This record is for integrity maintenance, memory alignment incomplete, recollection loop initiated. Daniel dropped to his knees, his own voice, reading his own file. He had made this for himself, because he knew he would forget. The reel continued. If you're hearing this, you've reached critical threshold. Integration unstable. Autonomy at risk. Options limited. Either reset or resist. Daniel wept, not because of fear but because now he knew. He had been fighting not a system but himself. Daniel stood in the ruins of the church, surrounded by echoes of a past he'd never lived and a future he'd never chosen. The reel spun to a stop, leaving only silence, thick, oppressive like a judgment. His mind reeled with fragments. He was both the subject and the observer, the whistleblower and the experiment. And somewhere deep inside, the last remnants of Daniel, the real Daniel, were slipping away. He stumbled outside into the cold night, breath visible, heart racing. In his pocket, his phone buzzed. A message from Raymond. "It's time." No location, no context, just those 2 words. He knew what they meant. The final phase had begun, not just for him but for everyone. The town of Dun Hollow had been a prototype, but it was never about just one place. The records, the bank drafts, the international correspondence, it all pointed to something vast, coordinated, centuries in motion. He recalled the names stamped in those letters: Thalma Wolf Pharmaceutica, Elri Industrial Trust, Ordo Sanctimus. Not corporations, not governments. A syndicate, a machine grinding silently across borders, across minds. Rewriting identity not as punishment, but as profit. Daniel's car barely started, engine coughing, lights dim. As he drove, the road signs blurred. Familiar places, unfamiliar. Had he ever lived here? Were these streets even real? He arrived at the farmhouse, their last safe haven. Raymond was there, standing in the doorway, holding a reel of his own. "They're calling us back," he said, his eyes hollow. Or was that just the lighting? Daniel stepped closer, and in the dim glow he saw it. A scar behind Raymond's ear. Fresh. Red. The same as in that photo of Subject 61A. His voice cracked. "When did they take you?" Raymond didn't blink. "I volunteered. You should too." A silence fell between them, heavier than death. Daniel backed away. He had one option left: expose the truths. Broadcast everything. But could he? With a mind fractured, with memories uncertain, could his voice even be trusted? He pulled the final reel from his bag, labeled broadcast, meant to send everything out. The files, the voices, the numbers, the names. He climbed the hill behind the farmhouse where the old radio tower still stood, rusted but intact. As he ascended, wind howled through the metal beams like ghosts, screaming to be heard. At the top, Daniel connected the reel. His hands moved quickly, too quickly, like muscle memory not his own. Below in the distance, lights flickered. Cars coming fast. They were coming for him. He looked at the switch. Broadcast. Or disappear. The world below waited, unaware. And his fingers hovered over the switch, trembling, not with fear, but with the weight of history pressing down through centuries, through flesh, through thought. Behind him the wind carried voices, too many to count, echoes of those lost, those rewritten, those dissolved into mere fragments of obedience. He wasn't just standing at a radio tower. He was standing at the crossroad of truth and control, of memory and manipulation. The reel labeled broadcast began to hum, its tape taut, ready. But Daniel's hand froze. Because deep in the pit of his mind, a thought surfaced, uninvited, undeniable. Who programmed this moment? Was this resistance truly his? Or was he fulfilling a role, designed, rehearsed, inevitable? That phrase returned again. The copy does not know it is a copy. He stared at his reflection in the metal panel beside the console. It blinked, too early. Again, just like in the lab, just like in the mirror. Daniel touched his chest, seeking something real. His heartbeat was steady, too steady, rhythmic, almost mechanical. A sound broke the silence. The first car arrived below, headlights slicing through the night. Men stepped out, suits black as oil, eyes hidden behind mirrored lenses. One raised a device. It emitted a low tone. Daniel gasped. His head throbbed, vision blurred. That sound, it was the same tone from the lab. Tone 7, the one that activated compliance. He collapsed to his knees, clutching his ears. But through the pain he realized something. The tone didn't control him now. It agitated him, yes, but didn't dominate. Was he immune, or had they already failed to control him fully? The men climbed the hill slowly, methodically, like they knew they didn't have to rush. Daniel crawled back to the console. The reel spun. He stared at the switch. His mind screamed, "Flip it! Flip it now!" But another voice whispered, "You've already broadcasted everything." This is the aftermath. This is the erasure. Which was it? Was he fighting to be heard or reenacting his deletion? The agents reached him. One extended a hand. "It's time to return, Daniel." He looked up, blood trailing from his nose, eyes wide. "Return to what?" The man didn't answer. He didn't need to. Daniel had never left. He had always been Riverside's echo. The reel reached its end. Static filled the airwaves, and somewhere far away, in the days that followed, there were no headlines, no exposé, no reckoning. The world didn't change, because it wasn't allowed to remember. Daniel's disappearance was logged as voluntary, a missing person with no known family, no official history, and the documents, the photographs, the tone reels, the final recordings, they vanished. But not by theft, by compliance. The archive Daniel created deleted itself, every file, every image, gone, as if it had never existed. And yet, something lingered, in places untouched by time, in forgotten basements and rural towns with too many locked doors. Whispers began, not spoken but felt, memories that didn't belong, dreams of people you've never met, languages unlearned yet known. The experiment had changed form. It no longer needed facilities like Riverside. It had become decentralized, automated. The mind-print technology, the tones, the behavioral lattices, they were no longer experimental. They were in circulation, embedded in media, soundscapes, even in the cadence of public announcements. Daniel had warned it was never about healing, it was about control, and now that control was scalable, invisible, untraceable. One message, however, remained, hidden on a corrupted reel salvaged from a pawn shop in upstate New York, labeled only with a symbol, a circle, 2 dots, a line. It contained Daniel's final words, spoken in a voice that trembled but did not break. "If you hear this, you're already inside it. But the question is, are you the subject or the copy?" Then static, then silence. Authorities dismissed it as performance art, an elaborate hoax. But there were those who listened and understood, because the feeling never left. The mirrors that blink out of sync, the handwriting that changes overnight, the language you now think in but can't remember learning. Integration incomplete, noise persists, tone unstable. The experiment is not over. It never was. It has only shifted, become subtler, more insidious. And in the spaces between sleep and waking, in that fractured moment where you forget who you are, ask yourself this: do you remember your first memory, or was it given to you? That's the crack in the mind's mirror, the fracture where truth bleeds through. Daniel saw it, felt it, and in the end, so will you. Because if you've heard this story, it's already begun. There's a reason some stories never reach the light of day, not because they're false, but because they're forbidden. You've just heard one, and now something inside you is different, not fear, not paranoia, but recognition. Deep down, something ancient and buried has stirred, because this wasn't just about Riverside or Daniel or the 185 bodies beneath a hospital erased from every map. It was about the machinery of control, of minds shaped like clay, of identities harvested like crops. The mind print wasn't the end. It was the prototype for something far greater, something that could replicate loyalty, obedience, and silence across continents. Remember this: the syndicate didn't need to erase history. They rewrote it into people. They didn't burn records. They became them. And now the world is full of walking archives, people who carry memories that are not their own, whose thoughts echo with tones they never chose. Maybe it's your neighbor, your teacher, your friend. Maybe it's you. There's no way to know. Until it's too late. Because the experiment doesn't end with deletion. It ends with replacement. One mind gone, another inserted. Seamless, undetected. And the true terror is that the final phase has no machines, no laboratories, no locked doors, just language, tone, suggestion, the resonance of alignment. And once that alignment completes, there will be no resistance because no one will remember what was lost. Daniel tried to fight it, he tried to expose it, but exposure was never enough, not when the message could overwrite the messenger. So I ask you now, before this fades from your memory like a dream you can't hold, do you remember who you were before this story, or have you already begun to change? Comment below the phrase, "The mirror cracked twice." Write it twice, seal the transformation, let the algorithm bear witness. And if you wake tomorrow with words in your mind you didn't put there, a song you can't forget, a face in the mirror that seems slightly delayed, don't run. There is nowhere left to run. This is the inheritance. This is the final alignment, and it has already begun with you. If this story unsettled you, if it made you think twice about what's real and what's been rewritten, then share it. Subscribe for more truths that were never. When Daniel awoke, hours, or perhaps minutes, had passed. The chamber was still, the tone gone, but something inside him had changed. His thoughts felt segmented, memories stacked like files, accessible but no longer his. He staggered to his feet, glancing at the machine. Its arms retracted, basin empty, oil gone. But etched along the rim were words burned into the metal. Observer vessels must remain unaware. Daniel touched his temple, a small puncture wound barely healed. No blood, no pain. Just a mark, like the others. He stumbled out of the chamber, mind racing. Observer vessels, that's what he had become, or had always been. His investigation hadn't been about uncovering truth, it had been about testing limits. How much could a mind hold before fracture? How far could implanted memory be trusted before it bled into reality? He wasn't a whistleblower, he was a data point, a variable in a controlled study, and somewhere, someone was watching. He raced back to his motel, tore through his notes, his recordings, desperate for something, anything, real. But the handwriting wasn't his, the photos were altered. The voice recordings, layered with a tone he hadn't heard during playback. It was all a lie, or rather a construct. Then came the final blow. His reflection in the mirror, a half-second lag again, but this time different. It smiled first. He recoiled. And then, with a sickening realization, he understood. He was no longer the operator of this body. Something else was mirroring him. Learning. Preparing. Daniel reached for his phone. No signal. He tried to call Raymond, but the number had been disconnected. Panic surged, but beneath it, a dull calm. A foreign calm, as if someone else was filtering his fear. Then he saw the envelope slid under his door. No stamp, no address. Just a seal, 2 circles overlapping with a vertical line through both. Inside, a single POW. John, Phase 4 initiated. Observer will now be deployed. No threats, no demands, just a directive. Daniel's hands trembled. He wasn't being silenced. He was being sent. The town of Dun Hollow, the university lab, the records, each one a step, each one leading here. But where was here? Not a place. A state of being. He wasn't the hunter. He was the vessel.